back to Late Night. We're here with Jake Tapper. As we mentioned, you're doing your show at 9 p.m. through the midterms.
Yeah.
This is going to be, you know, I think people have said this a lot. This is the biggest midterm in our lifetime. This does seem like a big one. And I'm wondering how you approach covering it, because it seems like you have one party digging their heels in advance about this election might be stolen from us again.
Yeah. In fact, Carrie Lake, the Republican nominee in Arizona, has basically said she's only going to accept the results if she wins.
Yep.
Which is an interesting guiding principle.
A nice piece of honesty. Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, there's a bunch of election liars, election deniers, who are in competitive races and could very likely win. Carrie Lake among them in Pennsylvania and Michigan and Arizona. And it's something that I think people in the media just need to be honest and upfront about.
What about how the returns come in? Because I think you've obviously been through so many of these election nights,
Yeah.
and sometimes certain places report early, and you know, all of a sudden you have a candidate who's leading 80 to 20. But people in the room know this isn't a real number yet, right?
Right.
We have, you know, the bluer areas of the state haven't reported. Like, do you have long discussions about how you put up the results?
Well, we just, when the results come in, we try to make sure people understand these are early ballots or this state has these kinds of rules. You know, it's very frustrating for me because I'm from Pennsylvania, and the legislature there, which is Republican-led, will not let the election boards not only count them ahead of time, the votes that come in early voting or absentee ballots, but even prepare them, meaning you can't even take them out of the envelope. So a whole bunch of votes will not be counted that day just because of how the rules are. And yet, people will then complain about how inefficient the system is as if there's some hijinks going on. And Trump took advantage of this in 2020. He made it very clear he was going to declare victory early, knowing that there were still going to be millions of votes to be counted.
I want to ask what your take is. Obviously, very early days of Elon Musk in charge of Twitter, but we've already seen a few things where he's, you know, he's magnifying news stories that are sort of unsourced and poorly reported.
They're not unsourced and poorly reported. They're nuts.
Yeah.
They're crazy. They're crazy. Okay. So, no, but there's bad journalism and then there's crazy, right? I mean, this is crazy. So Hillary Clinton cited something about the attack on Nancy Pelosi's husband being due to right-wing rhetoric and isn't that unfortunate, et cetera. And Elon Musk wrote back to her on Twitter, there might be something more, a little bit more to the story, and linked to a website that that had a smear campaign about Paul Pelosi, but more importantly, that had declared Hillary Clinton died in 2016.
Yeah.
And that a body double had actually debated Donald Trump. That was the source. That's the source material that we're dealing with.
So it's actually good that Elon said there might be more to this story than you think if you are who you say you are.
Right. Hillary Clinton.
But I think, right, that's the scary thing about this early approach is it does seem as though he likes to throw things out and say, just worth mulling over.
Yeah.
And that is not very helpful as far as moving forward the political discourse.
Yeah, look, I'm generally on the freer speech debate.
Of course.
That the solution to speech you don't like is more speech, but generally speaking, the idea that not only was he allowing this to be on the platform, which is you can make a decision about that one way or the other, that he was actually pushing it out as a guy with 110 million followers on Twitter is not a cause for confidence about what the platform's going to be like in the future. But we'll see. It's early days yet. Early days.
It is early days. I think he's got to turn it around.
You're not even on it that much anymore.
You know, look, I'm not going to pay $20 a month for a blue check mark. You kidding me? Guys, look, and let me explain why. I have a severe gambling problem. I want to talk about this, well, this is a very serious and incredibly well-reported piece of journalism that you have a family connection to. So this is a story about a young man who was convicted for a crime that he very likely didn't commit. But the one thing you make clear in the story is whether you think he committed the crime or not, no one would agree that he got good legal representation.
He had a horrible lawyer. My dad was his pediatrician. CJ Rice was 17. CJ had been shot. And my dad saw him in his pediatric office in South Philadelphia, and CJ could barely walk. 5 days later, there was another shooting, a horrible thing, and I think it's kind of shady, but ultimately somebody said that CJ did it, even though the shooters had been seen running. And CJ, my dad, other people who knew him thought, well, there's no way they're going to convict him of this or even charge him for it. He can barely walk, much less run.
He turned himself in.
He turned himself in.
Because he was so confident that based on the fact that he could not run, this would be a situation where they would just let him walk out of the police station.
Right, and his mom worked for the district attorney's office, et cetera. He gave them his phone thinking, well, they're clearly going to check to see that my phone was actually in West Philadelphia that day, not South Philadelphia where the shooting was. But none of that happened, and instead, he wasn't lucky enough to get a public defender. He's poor, so he couldn't afford a good attorney that you or I would have been able to afford. He didn't get a public defender, which are generally pretty good lawyers, public defenders. He had a court-appointed attorney, and some of them are great, but their record statistically and according to studies is much worse, and she was just a horrible lawyer, horrible. And one instance after another, she failed him, making him, having it be in juvenile court because he was 17, going to the crime scene, challenging the one piece of evidence against him over and over. And going through this case, which my dad asked me to look into after years of trying to get him out of prison, it really just opened my eyes about how, we know it intellectually, but there really are just two systems of justice, one for people who can afford it. I would never have even been charged with this crime. And if I had been, I would have gotten a lawyer who would have gotten it thrown out of court. But this kid, he got the bad end of the stick when it comes to this sort of thing, and he couldn't afford a good lawyer, and he had a horrible one, and now he's just in prison for 30 to 60 years for a crime in which nobody was even seriously wounded, much less killed, and it's not justice. And so, I hear a lot about crime on TV ads, and I'll be doing a piece about it on my show, but the idea that anytime anybody challenges a conviction that they're soft on crime, I'm not soft on crime. I want anybody guilty of a shooting offense in jail, in prison. But I don't think he did it, and that means the people who did do it, they're still out there.
Well, it's a really wonderful piece of reporting. The connection to your father and the role he played, the really noble role he played, it should be noted as well, makes for a great reading. And thank you so much for being here. It's always
so good to see you in person. Yeah, thank you.
You guys, that's Jake Tapper, CNN Tonight. With Jake Tapper, airs nightly on CNN through the midterms, and his cover story for The Atlantic is out now. We'll be right back with Sheryl Lee Ralph.